Forget this one is An Open-Hearted Life. The version that was printed in UK is called Living with an Open Heart. And I always get them confused. Yeah. And some of my books, I can't even remember the titles of them when people ask me. So, you win some and you lose. Okay. So let's just have a few minutes of silence to return to our breath, let the mind settle down. And then we will talk about compassion and personal distress. What? Compassion and personal distress? Those two don't belong together in the same sentence. We'll check that out. Okay, so just let your breath be as it is. Observe what's happening as you inhale and exhale. Let's generate our motivation. And recall that when we talk about compassion, the wish for sentient beings to be free of misery, we're not just talking about ourselves. Self-compassion is a very big thing now. I see it a lot when I Google online. But here we're really trying to include all sentient beings. So not just focusing on ourselves, but realizing that we and all beings are the same in wanting happiness and not suffering, and in deserving happiness and not suffering. And so no matter who people are or even how they act towards us, we want to wish them to be free of misery. So let's have that motivation that acts as the foundation of our sharing the Dharma this morning. So before I get into this chapter, I want to continue on a little bit from the motivation, where we said no matter how people act towards us or who they are, we want them to be free of misery. This past week, the jury was deciding on the what to have happen to the shooter at the Parkland school shootings. And there was a big discussion because of the 12 jurors to have a death penalty. All of them needed to conclude the same thing. and 3 of them didn't. And some of the people who did want the death penalty were on the jury were very upset at the ones who didn't. And some of the parents also were very upset. They were really thought that, the teenager who, killed 17 and attempted to kill another 17 deserved to be put to death. And because of 3 people, that wasn't going to happen. So I was thinking about this because some years ago, one of the inmates I write to, he was on the death row, and his attorney, his last attorney, came out, and she was really trying very hard to make a case for clemency for him. And since I had been corresponding with him, I knew him quite well. And she wanted me to kind of testify as she was doing this video to show the board, the appeal board, and probably the governor, although I don't know how much the governor actually looks at the cases, So she was explaining to me, I mean, from my side, I've always had a feeling that, as Gandhi said, if you have an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, everybody's going to be blind and nobody's going to have teeth, because we've all made mistakes. And also, doing to one person what they've done to another doesn't solve anything. It doesn't, if you give the death penalty to somebody, it doesn't bring the loved ones back at all. So the attorney was explaining to me that in the prison system, the prosecutors, they want to get a lot of convictions with the death penalty. That's supposed to be good, and that will, since many of them are elected, it will help them get reelected. But she said that her observation, and she's been to many executions because she's defended these people, and she's a public defender. And she said that the death penalty does not alleviate the pain of the family of the victim at all. She said that the prosecutors convince the family to really want the death penalty, telling them it's justice, it will pay back the person who took the life of your loved one, and really, convince the family of that, because if the family speaks out a lot wanting the death penalty, that will influence the jury. And she said that the prosecutors do this, but at all the elections she's been to, she's seen that afterwards, the family, it doesn't help their healing at all. Because after the execution, the prosecutor goes, good, we got that guy, and then completely drops the family. The case is over. Nobody talks to the family anymore, about this. And they're supposed to have healed from the loss of the person they loved, and they haven't. Yeah. So when I heard this, when the jury delivered the verdict here, not the verdict, but I don't know what you call it, the punishment, the repercussions, the consequences of what this kid did, and I saw how angry people were, both the jury and some of the family members. It made me very sad because they really thought that taking the life of this mass shooter would heal the pain from losing those 17 kids. And of course, it wasn't going to. And I felt sad too, because they were so tied up in their anger, not only towards the victim, but also now towards the jury members. And people are never happy when they're angry. Yeah, anger is not an emotion conducive to human happiness. So it made me quite sad. I really wanted, to kind of write to all of them, and to the people who said, no, give him, life without parole, and say, don't feel bad. You did the right thing. Because my experiences in dealing with people who are imprisoned is many of them, not everybody, but many of them, really change their attitudes and come around while they're in prison. And one time when I was visiting San Quentin, I was giving a talk at San Quentin. And one of the guys who was, he was a lifer, and he explained to me that the people who are lifers, they realize they're not getting out, and that they have to make a life in the prison. And so they do their best to make a good life for themselves while they're in prison, because they see that, if they're acting out all the time and angry and so on, they're going to wind up in the hole, which is also called ADSEG, administrative segregation, or solitary confinement. That's the general term. And that's certainly no fun at all. And they commented that it's the young guys who have a sentence of a certain number of years who are the rowdy ones, because they're saying, oh, I'm going to be in for 8 years or 10 years, and then I'm going to be out on the streets again. And when I'm out on the streets, I'm going to do this and do that, the other thing. And their minds are in the future creating this life of how they're going to live once they're on the streets. Whereas the lifers don't do that. They're more dealing with the here and now. And I really saw that in the people who came to attend that talk that I gave at San Quentin, because they were a mixture of lifers and people who were just young guys for a short time. And I just remember one of the young guys, he kind of came in, just. And the look was, okay, lady, what are you going to tell me? I don't think you got anything good to say, but I'm here. And he plopped himself down and sat like this. So you know what this gesture means. I'm protecting myself. I am not open to anything. And he stretched his legs out, apart in the, okay, lady, what do you have to say? So I started speaking, and I think I was speaking about anger or compassion or something, along that line. And so as I'm talking, his body language changed. Yeah. And you could tell the mind was changing. So that kind of change can happen when people are imprisoned, when they hear something that rings true or that really meets their needs for how they are. So compassion, when I said it in the motivation, everybody deserves, happiness and not suffering. Some people go, oh, wait a minute, that guy did this and this and that, and the former president, we got, It's, that kind of mind stream basically makes us miserable, as well as creates a lot of negativity, negative karma, and we spew out negativity to other people. Yeah, because we think people have to deserve happiness. Now, I'm not sure, where did that idea come from that we deserve happiness? Is that something from, Christianity, that you'll go to heaven if you play by all the rules, but if you don't, you'll go to hell? So you have to do something and play by the rules to, go to heaven and be happy. Otherwise, you're destined for hell, and because something's really wrong with you. Is it coming from that? Or is it coming from our grade school experience where, if you get, all B's or all A's or all gold stars, then we'll go out for hot fudge sundae, or you'll get a new Lego set where you have to perform in order to get some happiness. Yeah, we have that running all through our culture. Yeah, but Buddhism is saying, no, everybody wants happiness. Nobody wants suffering. And if the people whose actions we are objecting to were happy, they wouldn't be doing the actions that we object to. Yeah. If people were really happy, they don't go out killing and stealing and raping and lying and so on. They don't wake up. If you're happy and content in your life, you don't wake up in the morning and say, sun is shining, what a great day. I'm glad I'm alive. I think I'm going to go murder somebody. If you're happy, you don't think like that. So clearly, the people who are doing things, whether it's on a societal level or a personal level that harms us personally, to remember that they're suffering. And if they weren't unhappy, they would be acting and speaking and thinking in a very, very different way, So it doesn't hurt to wish them happiness. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes we're very hesitant to wish people to be happy. Again, they have to earn it. Yeah. Of course, we have the get out of jail free card, and we deserve happiness all the time, no matter how we act. Yeah. But other people, there's a different standard for. Okay. So we here have, yes, we have to have compassion for ourselves and not be so self-critical. But if compassion for self becomes, self-indulgence and leaves out other people, then something's wrong. Yeah, it's very partial compassion. So it's really a project that we have to work at, not just thinking about ourselves, but extending that wish for people to be free and animals and bugs to be free of suffering and have happiness. We've got to have a big mind doing that. So that was the introduction. Now I'll do what I'm supposed to be doing. Okay. So this is chapter 56 in An Open-Hearted Life, and its title is Compassion and Personal Distress. Okay. So this is a chapter that I've done. Some of the chapters Russell has done, some of them I did. So cultivating compassion begins with being moved by suffering. First, we become aware of our own suffering. Feeling that it is unbearable, we aspire to be free from it. Then we don't just stay with our own suffering. okay, then we shift our focus to others and become aware of their suffering. That is sometimes hard to do. Yeah, when we're ill, when we're injured, when we're incredibly sad or upset about something, it is so difficult to think that other people also suffer. We're so consumed in our own misery. Okay, is this ringing a bell, or am I the only one who has this problem? Yeah, when I am suffering, that's all that occupies my mind. Okay. And of course, all the arguments like, why should this happen to me? Why is this happening to me? Of course, when I'm happy, I never say, why is this happening to me? When I'm suffering, why do I deserve this? When I'm happy, I never say, why do I deserve this? This is what I'm suffering. Oh, it shouldn't be like this. I want it to go away. Go away, go away, go away. And of course, it doesn't. So then I cry harder because I'm suffering and nobody understands me and nobody's on my side and nobody understands how miserable I am. Okay. Any of you have that? Yeah. Okay. So, here, if we see our own suffering, then to take the next step and really see that others are suffering too. Okay. Many of them in the same way that we are. Yeah. Before I had my hip replacement, and if you ever need a hip replacement, you have some experience of just a little bit of pain, like it hurts like hell. But anyway, I was able to go and have a hip replacement that turned out wonderful. And, the pain in that leg is no longer there. Of course, now I have pain in the other leg, but never mind. At least, the pain in that leg is gone. But I started to think, when I was, going through the before the surgery, of people who live in rural areas in other countries. I've traveled to India and Nepal and different places who have no access to modern medicine. And so if they have this kind of pain and they need a hip replacement, there is nowhere to go to get it. And even if there is in the capital city, a hospital that can do this surgery, those people don't have the funds to afford it. And so for the rest of their lives, they live with this excruciating pain. Yeah. And then when I think about that, and then I think, oh, yes, mine hurt. And yes, I had to wait a few months to get an appointment with the orthopedist, and I had to wait to get the surgery. But I got the surgery, and how fortunate I am compared to people who this just, it would take over the whole rest of their lives. Yeah. So, thinking when we're in pain, extending the mind to the pain of others, starting with people who have the same problem, but then, because that resonates with us, but then we can expand that to all sorts of people who have all sorts of misery. Okay. So realizing that others' suffering is no different from our own. Suffering is suffering, no matter whose it is. We feel that it too is unbearable. Then we consider others' kindness to us and the fact that our lives depend on them. Feeling empathy and gratitude, we experience compassion and want them to be free from their suffering. Okay, so that's how we develop suffering. We become aware of our own. Yeah. Then we realize that others have it too. And then we think about the kindness we've received from other living beings and will receive in the future from them. And then, then their suffering really seems unbearable. Okay, now, unbearable. When we hear that word, suffering is unbearable. Unbearable. I can't stand it, and we get emotionally, this is unbearable. I can't stand it. It's got to change. It can't be like this. Yeah. And because that's often the way we feel about our own misery. And when somebody we really care about deeply is suffering like that, we often feel the same way. Yeah. I can't bear to see them suffer. Yeah. And what happens at that point is the word I can't bear to see them suffer becomes internal anger at the situation, personal distress. I can't bear to see them suffer. So with compassion, the focus is on the person who's suffering. But when I suffer because I see others suffer, and I become depressed and or panicked or whatever, then the focus now has become on me, my misery at seeing them suffer. Okay? So I can't bear to see them suffer is no longer completely compassion that wants to alleviate their misery. It is internal pain that wants their misery to be removed so that my pain at seeing them suffer goes away. Is this making some sense to you? Yeah? Have you had that happen? And so sometimes it comes out as, Aunt Ethel had a heart attack. She's in the hospital. And you love Aunt Ethel and but you don't want to go see her. There's resistance to go visiting her in the hospital. Yeah. There's fear. I don't want to see her suffering. Yeah. And the fear could be because if I see Aunt Ethel suffering, it reminds me that I am capable of the same thing. And I do not want to think about that. I want to deny the possibility of my own suffering, deny what samsara is. And also, I care about her and I don't want to see her like that. And it's distressing and it's scary. Yeah. And I'm uncomfortable. So I'd rather not go in the hospital to see Aunt Ethel. I'll send her flowers. Yeah. And hope that communicates my affection for her. But that when we have that response, it's an interesting time to stop and really say, what's behind my resistance to going to visit her in the hospital? Yeah. Is it fear that I might experience something like that? Is it just disgust at anybody experiencing that? Is it distaste because it makes me uncomfortable? Yeah. So can I look at others suffering really focused on their experience without changing the focus to my uncomfortable response? Yeah. So some people hesitate to cultivate compassion, thinking that it will only bring them more suffering and that they already have more than enough suffering. Okay. So I don't want to go see, Aunt Ethel in the hospital. I don't want to go see Uncle Morris in the hospital. It's just too distressing for me. Okay. So we're afraid that recognizing others' suffering will bring us more suffering. However, when we choose to look at others' suffering and cultivate compassion, our experience is very different from what we normally feel when encountering others' misery. Cultivating compassion is done voluntarily and for a specific purpose. Okay, so it's not just like our emotional reaction to seeing people suffer. We want to develop compassion, okay, because we know it's a good quality to have and it'll help us help other people, okay? So using reasoned consideration to understand others' situation, we come to experience an emotion that we see as beneficial and want to have. So sometimes, our fear of others' suffering, our fear of personal distress makes us stick our head in the sand and we don't want to see anything, Don't tell me about it. Yeah. I come from a very interesting family. My mother actually told me at one time that if I, got severely ill or an accident, she doesn't want to hear because it would be too much misery for her. Okay, Mom, I won't tell you. I wasn't planning on telling her anyway because I know, her reactions. But it was interesting for somebody to say, if you're suffering a lot, I don't want to hear because it's too distressing for her. And she'd rather, keep her head in the sand. And, when we hear about situations, when we really think, for example, what's going on in Ukraine, and not just the death of the Ukrainians, but the death of these Russian kids that are going to war too. Yeah. And how they're all forced by the social conventions and the society, of war and defending your country, that they have to go out and have a mind that wants to kill other people who they don't know, but who they have to consider as enemies. War is one of the most stupid things I've ever heard of. It doesn't solve any problems, and yet throughout history, this is what people have done to solve conflicts. Yeah, is let's go kill each other. And whoever survives is the winner. Stupid. Don't you think it's stupid? I think it's just totally stupid, And if we want to have war, why don't we put the leaders in a sandbox and a playground and let them throw sand at each other, and leave the rest of us out of it, because most people, they don't want to go kill and fight other people, and the leaders are always staying safe in their own palaces. Okay. Sorry, I get off on my soapboxes once in a while, and war is one of my soapboxes. Yeah. Okay. So, where are we? Okay. So we come to experience an emotion that we see as beneficial and want to have. That's when we voluntarily cultivate compassion and really look at people's suffering with a clear mind. So this is a very different experience from having a sudden emotional outburst that can't bear another's misery. In the latter case, we feel overwhelmed by a sense of distress that we do not want. However, with compassion, we are overcome with an emotion that we do want. Okay? So it is often said that holy beings are bound by compassion to those who are suffering. Yeah, I remember helping one of my teachers translate a prayer to Chenrezig, and the prayer was talking about how Chenrezig, Buddha of compassion at the top there, how he can't bear to see others suffering and is bound by, by compassion to sentient beings. And I was thinking, wait, because I didn't understand the difference between actual compassion and personal distress. I was thinking, wow, that sounds like us ordinary beings. And Chenrezig he's a bodhisattva, he's a Buddha. He shouldn't be feeling like that. And then my teacher explained when they say the Buddhas are attached to sentient beings, it doesn't mean our attachment, or when they're bound by seeing their suffering. It doesn't mean, like you're imprisoned by it, but rather their hearts are so big that they don't shy away from it. And when they see the suffering of sentient beings, their response is not fear. Yeah, it's not like, this is too much, get away. It is, what can I do to help? And I think that's remarkable. Yeah, because it's so much different when I see people suffering. Sometimes I see people suffering, and it's like, get over it already. Stop complaining. If people really have a good reason for suffering, okay, sure. But when I think people are feeling sorry for themselves, it's like, come on, don't play that game. I have no compassion for them. Okay, some of you know that. Yeah. But I'll rationalize that. That's tough love, Yeah, don't give me your self-pity trip. And why do I do that? Because I know the self-pity trip extremely well. I have cultivated it to perfection. Yeah. So when I see somebody going in that direction, it just bugs me. Because I do it. Okay. So, however, the bondage of the holy beings is one that they choose and honor. In fact, rather than being burdened by compassion, they find freedom. They are no longer imprisoned by selfish concern. Think about that for a minute, how imprisoned we are by self-concern, how we blow up, to infinite proportions, anything that concerns ourselves. And when we can really be free from that self-concern, that self-obsession, then there's peace in our own hearts. And then there's space to really care about others and have compassion for them. When our compassion is still weak, it may easily slip into personal distress. Okay, so personal distress is the close enemy of compassion. Okay, in entry 35, I think we talked about chapter 35 in the book, the close enemies of different things. So personal distress looks like compassion, but it is the close enemy because it isn't compassion. Okay. So, different attachment is the close enemy to love because it has fondness for the other person, but it's not love because there's strings attached. Okay. So things that look like a good emotion, but are actually have some corruption in them. Okay. So genuine compassion focuses on the person who is suffering and wishes them to be free of suffering and its causes. Personal distress, on the other hand, focuses on our pain at witnessing another's suffering. With personal distress, we can't bear to see their suffering because we hurt when seeing it. Personal distress clouds our minds and may lead us to feeling so much sadness that we become unable to act to help others. Yeah, and I've seen this happen many times. One time when I was living in Singapore, a family called me and they said, our relative is dying. Please come over and talk to him. And so I went over and, the family opened the door and you enter into the living room and the family's sitting there. And the patient who's dying is in the back bedroom. But the family wanted to talk to me because they were in so much distress. So I wound up talking to the family for about an hour. And then I only had a shorter time to go into the back bedroom to talk to the person who was actually dying. Because the family was in so much distress that, I was quite happy to help them. Yeah. But what I saw was when other people are distressed because a dear one is dying, it blocked the help getting, I couldn't spend as much time with the person who was dying. Yeah. Some years ago, during one of your courses, Geshe-la, somebody was dying in Idaho. And so some of us went over to talk to him. And he was actually one of the former inmates that I had corresponded with. And it was very different there. The family was, they weren't, of course, they were not happy that he was dying. But they wanted us to go talk to him. So it was a completely different thing. We went in, we talked to him for quite a long time, and then afterwards we were able to give the family some advice and so on. But a very, very different experience. So the evolution of personal distress begins with seeing another person's suffering as so bad that nothing can be done to change it. Okay? So often when we think of our own suffering or another's suffering, there's this feeling that the suffering is permanent. It's everlasting. There's nothing that will change it. Yeah. And especially if somebody is terminally ill, it's like, okay, that they have the death sentence and there's nothing that, can change that. They're upset by dying. I'm upset because they're dying, Okay. So then feeling their suffering as hopelessly unbearable, our attention turns to our pain at witnessing their misery. Okay. We lose the ability to discern what is our responsibility and what is theirs. What is their suffering and what is our suffering. Okay. We feel guilty seeing another person suffer and think we should be able to do something about it. Yeah. Do you feel that sometimes when somebody you care about is upset about something and you want to help them, but you can't think of anything to do and then you feel guilty. Yeah, like I should be able to do something to change this, when in actual fact, we have no power to change it. Yeah. We may make something better, but we can't certainly change it. For example, often when people suicide, the family feels very guilty. We should have been able to prevent this person from suiciding. It's our fault. We didn't love them enough. We didn't do this for them. We did that to them, which we shouldn't have, and we should have done this. And the family goes through endless self-torture, thinking that they should have been able to prevent the suicide. Okay. And suicide definitely is a tragedy, but it's a choice that the other person made. Yeah. It's their choice, and we cannot control what other people choose. We can try and influence, we can try and help, but we cannot crawl into their minds and pull switches and make them think differently than they do. Yeah. And so accepting that powerlessness, and accepting that it was somebody else's choice is very difficult. Yeah. But thinking that we should be all powerful is equally as ridiculous. Yeah. That we should be able to prevent that. Yeah. We can't even control our own mind, let alone control other people's decisions. Yeah. So it's difficult, but people really have to separate, what is their decision and what is my decision, and not hold ourselves responsible for things that we are not responsible for. Yeah. I know that families who hear this, who are suicide, going, no, you don't understand. Actually, we should have been able to do something. What? You love them. You did your best. What do you mean you should have been able to do something? If you had the power, you would have done it. Yeah. Okay. So we feel guilty seeing another person suffer and think we should be able to do something about it. Not knowing what to do to relieve their suffering, we then become distressed. Yeah. We may become angry at the situation or even at the other person who's suffering, or at the public policy or the institution or the event that contributed to others' suffering. Somebody is in an accident and we get mad at whoever, there was somebody in a car accident and we get mad at the driver who was intoxicated or who, was looking at their cell phone when they were driving. Okay, we get mad at them. Yeah. And so, or we get mad at, why is there the death penalty? It shouldn't be like this. And so anger can drive activism. Yeah. But something isn't right. Yeah. It's playing into an us and them thing when we get angry. At a complete loss for any practical remedy to help this other person, we may stew in depression. Yeah, so that often happens when a spouse dies, a child dies, you don't have any control, but you think you should have, but we don't. Instead of our helping others, they now have to help us because we're depressed. Okay. And so you see this very, very often. How do we counteract this unhelpful personal distress? So people may hear this as me saying, you should not have personal distress. You're wrong. You're bad. You shouldn't feel that way. No, I am not saying that. Yeah, you can listen to the tape again. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that if we have it, we have a choice. Do we want to feel the personal distress and let ourselves spin around and, get really depressed? Or do we want to try to see the situation in another way? Yeah. And cultivate compassion for the other person. Okay, so how do we counteract this unhelpful personal distress? Remembering that we cannot control everything that happens in the world helps us to accept the reality of situations that we don't like. Yeah, so accepting our lack of control. Although we aren't able to undo the complex network of conditions that brought about others' misery, we can think creatively about what we can do to lessen their suffering, make it more tolerable, or to reverse its course. Recalling that misery is impermanent by nature. In other words, it cannot and will not remain the same, helps us to put suffering in a realistic perspective. So doing the taking and giving meditation, where we imagine taking others' suffering, giving them our happiness, doing that is also beneficial, as is remembering the meaning of actual compassion and bringing our mind back to that experience. We may have learned a number of other effective strategies that help us tolerate distress in our lives. Yeah. And the key is to remember them and use them when you need them. Because we've all heard lots of teachings about how to handle these. But in the actual situation, the mind goes blank. Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting because we do sometimes courses on death and dying, and we talk about this and how to handle it. But the moment somebody is a relative or a dear one is dying, then those people who have heard the teachings call us up and say, what do I do? Because at that moment, the personal distress is so overpowering that they can't remember the antidotes. So the key is really to apply the antidotes and think about these things first. Yeah, when your mind is, not in the middle of the situation, to develop familiarity with thinking like that. So with compassion, we can see situations more clearly and respond in a helpful manner. And when I think about the compassion of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, who are bound to sentient beings by their compassion, they don't get depressed. Yeah, when they see the condition of the world, they don't get depressed. Rather, they get energized, to progress along the path. The Bodhisattvas, really reaffirm their wish to become fully awakened so they can be of the best benefit to others. And also they have the wisdom that knows that misery, that suffering has causes, and those causes can be eliminated. They may not be able to be eliminated right now. Yeah. And in some conditions, not even in this lifetime, but the chief causes of samsara, ignorance, craving, and so forth, those can be eliminated. So when bodhisattvas see the situation of sentient beings in cyclic existence, they don't get depressed because they know that those causes can be eliminated. Rather, they get energized to be able to help other sentient beings see what those causes are, learn the antidotes to them, and apply those antidotes. Yeah. Because, bodhisattvas, they don't get depressed like we get depressed. Because they have this wisdom that understands the situation quite deeply. Okay, so not falling into personal distress, we can assess the situation accurately, seeing what needs to be done, what we are capable of doing, and what the other person is capable of accepting when someone else may be better suited to offer help. Okay, so sometimes we do know what needs to be done, but other people say, forget it, I don't want your help. Yeah, and you can often see this if you have a dear one who is, has a substance abuse problem, and you know that going to rehab would be really beneficial, but they deny their problem and they say, I don't have a problem. I don't need to go to rehab. Mind your own business. Yeah. So again, a situation here, we may know something that can help them, but they don't want the help at that moment. Okay. So if we think, oh, they don't want my help forever and ever and ever, then we get depressed. But if we think they don't want my help at this moment, but I said that and I planted a seed in their mind, and at some later time, when they have hit bottom, then they may want to go to rehab, and they'll remember my suggestion and come to me at that moment, and then I can take them. Okay? So do you see how our mind, we want to do something immediately to change the circumstance, and the other person's not ripe, and we have to accept that, But we plant the seed, and then later, maybe they'll come around. Okay, and sometimes we know what needs to be done, but we're not the right person to offer help. Okay, an example here is parents who refer their teenagers to other wise adults when the teenagers have problems. Because as parents, you love your kids dearly, but when they go through teenage years, you can't tell them much. Okay, not all teenagers, but many of us. But if you've made it so when your children are going up, they have relationships with other adults who have a lot of wisdom, who they trust, then when they're teenagers and they're in crisis and so on, they may go to those other adults and they can hear those other adults, whereas they can't hear what their parents are saying. Yeah? Any of you like that when you were teenagers? Yeah? Okay, admit it. Yeah. So parents have tremendous compassion for their children, but they may not be the right people to help their own children at that time. The teenagers may be more open to the counsel of other adults. Being able to step back and let this happen is an act of kindness on the parent's part. Okay. For this reason, it's helpful if parents enable their children to form close connections with wise adults when they're very young. Okay. Then, when they become teenagers, there are other adults they can go to for advice if they feel uncomfortable asking their parents, or if the problematic situation involves their parents. Okay, so that's a really good way to work with kids, yeah. So that they have a variety of people that who are wise, who they can trust and seek out. Otherwise, they go to their friends, yeah. And their friends are, in 7th grade, just like them. And, I know in 7th grade, we are almost omniscient, but, maybe not. So it takes a lot of courage and fortitude to be compassionate. Okay, compassion is not for wimps. Some people think compassion, makes you weak. It makes you sentimental. You're crying all the time with compassion, or you're meddling in other people's business. Yeah, compassion is none of those. You need a very clear mind and a lot of inner strength to have compassion. We have to be able to bear seeing others suffering, even though it is unbearable. Okay. We have to be able to maintain a strong wish that they not suffer, even in situations where we can do little to change it. It is necessary to have a strong and stable mind that can remember our foremost aim is to benefit others. Okay, and so here's the reflection for that. There is great suffering in our world, and sometimes witnessing it leads us to feel helpless and hopeless, which impacts our ability to be compassionate. We just say, the world is screwed up. What can you do? The only thing I can do is I'm just going to go out and have a good time myself because I can't control anything. So drink, drug, sex, whatever you want, just, look for our own happiness because we don't like feeling helpless and hopeless. Mm-hmm. Okay, so are these situations in which you feel immobilized by personal distress? When we tune out, when we stick our head in the sand? If so, give yourself some empathy and compassion. How might you help yourself feel safe so that you can then extend your compassion to others? So if others' suffering scares you, how can you create some feeling of safety for yourself? Yeah. Maybe one way is to realize, oh, I'm not experiencing that right now. Or one way I find to give myself a sense of safety often involves imagining giving to what the people who are suffering, what they need. And just that fact of imagining, this is the taking and giving meditation, giving them what they need and imagining them, their suffering is solved, I find that helps me calm down, and feel safe. How might you view this situation in a way that allows you to be compassionate and not be overcome by your distress? So these are the questions we need to think about. You might start by acknowledging that while you cannot control the situation, you can do something to help. We may not be able to control somebody's death, but we can be there with them if they want people to be there with them, or we can leave them alone if they would rather die alone. We can see what it is that they feel and act accordingly. Or you may try shifting your attention away from the troubling situation, balancing your own emotions, and then coming back to help. Yeah. I had a situation happen during COVID I can't remember. COVID is just kind of this historical blur in my mind. I can't remember what year things happened. Yeah. But there was somebody who was in contact with me who was suicidal. And so I spent a lot of time writing emails back and forth. She was on the other side of the country. And, talking to her and, and sometimes online conversations. And this went on for months and months and months, really trying to help her see the benefit of being alive and to see her own potential. And she was definitely there was some mental illness involved because she was seeing things that weren't happening and then getting very distressed by them. And then one day I got the phone call that, she did suicide. So it was at first, distressing because here's a human life and she had potential, she was even a Dharma student, but it couldn't get through. But then, okay, I was sad that happened, but then we do prayers and practices for people who die. And so I turned my mind to doing that. And when I did that, okay, this is, I can't go in the bardo and change her experience. I can't make her live again and change what she did. But I can make prayers for her and hope to direct her own mental energy in a good way. And so doing that, that's all I could do. Yeah. Okay. So that's the chapter on compassion and personal distress. Maybe we have time for a few questions.
This makes me think of a coping mechanism that I and a lot of my friends are using lately, which is controlling our exposure to the news because of the distress. Yeah. And it makes me wonder if instead we should be like trying to stretch ourselves to stay in that mind of compassion rather than personal distress, or if there is wisdom in limiting exposure.
Yeah. If you don't have a way to handle your personal distress, then avoiding the news, can work. But also watching the news and depending on what the situation is, knowing that the media does, exaggerate, not exaggerate, but knowing that we're seeing, like if you're seeing the news of what's happening in Ukraine, okay, yes, that suffering is very real. But you'll also find stories of people helping each other that are so moving. And so to remember, you may see the suffering and the stories on that are really emphasized, but there's also a lot of kindness going on too. So to remember both sides of it. Yeah. Or if you watch the news, what I do is, to me, it's a big lesson about karma, and the karma people are creating now, which will bring experiences in the future. The karma that people created in the past that's having them suffer right now. Watching how people make decisions about what to do in the case. I have friends in Russia and I have friends in Ukraine, and watching their decisions, and some of them I agree with and some of them I don't. I have one friend, and it's like, please leave. You need to leave. And Venerable Thubten and I, we have pleaded, we have emailed, we have had Zoom conversations, but that's the situation, and we have to accept it, but to help in the way that we can. Yeah. And maybe sometime he'll get it that he needs to leave, and all we can do is hope that we can help him at that time. Who knows? Because as rules and regulations happen, it's more and more difficult to help people who want to leave. Yeah. Okay. So it's up to you. Yeah. You have to balance. I think it's really an exercise in wisdom of how much we expose ourselves to the news, and we shouldn't feel like, I have to see all of it and know everything because that's reality. It's part of what's happening in the world, but there's a whole lot else going on. Yeah. And so to know, what do I need to know, and what, is not helpful for me at this moment. Does that help? Yeah. Other questions? Okay, then let's dedicate the merit.